Willkommen, welcome everyone to another episode of the Gin and Tonic Show, discussion show about Middle Eastern philosophy, religion, history, and all sorts of other good things. I'm your host, Almighty Atheismo. I'm joined today by Klingschor and Stopspamming. Today the topic is Sincerity. Do the prophets, adherents, and apologists of the world's various religions, supernatural belief systems believe what they're saying, or is there some other explanation? If you'd like to join us at any time, please send a Skype contact request to the Gin and Tonic Show, or if you've already done so, just send a comment in the contact list. Please do not call in the show. We will call you when we're ready to take callers. You can ask any question or make any comment about either what we're discussing or a topic of your own choosing. Make sure that you mute and minimize your blog TV when you do come onto the show, so as you don't hear and see everything on a feedback loop twice, which will disorient you and disrupt the flow of the show. All guests are advised that this is recorded for upload on YouTube and streamed live on blog TV. So, gentlemen, originally the topic was going to focus more just on Muhammad and whether he was telling the truth, but we're going to reserve that primarily for the second hour. What I want to talk about really is, and this does tie into the topic of sincerity, is this absolute fiasco, this train wreck that happened on our sister show, the Magic Sandwich Show. Who wants to start? Kling, I don't think you have watched it yet, but Stop has.
Yeah, and I was
haven't
shocked.
had that pleasure.
Well, it's not a pleasure, it's painful. If you have people talking about we can't know anything, like total denial of anything, and then saying there's only one thing that we know, and this we know for sure, and that is my personal favorite flavored God exists. And this God is the one who is allowing me a glimpse of reality the way that I would very much, really would like to see it. And that is it. And this is, I mean, I freaked when I heard this. I was shouting at the screen. I thought, I mean, no, I can't believe it. It's so insincere. It is so stupid. It is such a stupid lie that it's unbelievable. I cannot believe that there are actually people who are, I mean, it's an audacity. I don't know what to call it. That people actually go on camera, on screen, in public, and propagate stuff like this. And I mean, we were going to talk about Muhammad, whether he was actually the sincere guy who couldn't lie, blah, blah, blah. Well, if you look at this, you find out, no, he wasn't. And it looks like people who are defending the prophets of the day are just as insincere. They don't care what the truth is. They just care what feels nice, what sounds nice, what gives them comfort. And it's always first person singular. It's only me. I need to feel comfortable, and this is why I believe that there is this God, and you need to believe the same thing.
Yeah, for those of you who didn't catch it, on the Magic Sandwich Show, they had the best of the skeptics, right? The top men who worked on the Ark of the Covenant in the Indiana Jones movie. They went up against the two guests that we had. Eric Hovind, who of course is the son of Kent Hovind and has taken over Kent Hovind's ministry now that Kent Hovind is in prison for fraud and other things. And then they had an up-and-coming sort of new talent, a man named Saitan Bruggencate, who really did the most of the talking and most of the heavy lifting, such as it was. And, you know, like Stop was saying, the comparison between them and Muhammad, I really think that Muhammad was the Saitan Bruggencate of Islam, and and Saitan is essentially almost like the Muhammad of Christianity. It was really quite painful. If there's not enough pain in your life, go watch the last Magic Sandwich Show if you have not already. It was excruciating, and really, even though I certainly admire the people who normally host the panel, and consider many of them my personal friends. There's just no shortage of criticism that was, I think, rightfully laid at their feet. And frankly, DPR has already contacted me. He'd like to come on. I guess we might as well just take him right now, since everything that we're going to talk about is pertinent. Yuri, I know that you've also sent me a message. I'll bring you on in due time, but since everything is going to revolve around DPR and the show, I think it's only fair that we let him say something in his defense before we insist he commit ritualized Japanese seppuku and kill himself for his failures. So welcome to the program.
Hi, thank you very much for having me. Let me just turn you down a little bit because I just put my headphones in and my eardrums are about to burst. That's better, thank you. Yes, it was an interesting program, wasn't it?
No.
I wanted to come on to defend the position because there are obviously quite a lot of people who have posted comments and sent messages basically saying, why are you wasting your time with these people? I thought it was important to do so because this presuppositional argument that they are using is something that is fairly new, and well, it's not new, it's been around for years, but they are using it. It does appear very much as if they have given up on the evidential arguments that they used to use. I mean, you mentioned Eric and his father Kent. I mean, Kent used to use only scientific evidential arguments for his God. Eric used to do that and still does to a degree, but he is really concentrated now on this presuppositional position. And I think the reason is that he could not defend the scientific evidential arguments. And this is an absolutely wonderful cop-out for them. And for those that are not familiar with the argument, it can come as a little bit of a shock to them, and they don't know how to deal with it. And the reason that we wanted them on the show is to give ammunition to the atheists who may come across the likes of Cy and Eric using this type of argument, which I suspect we're going to see more of. Give them ammunition to use against them. And as a non-philosophical person, a philosophical illiterate, if you will, I think there are just two arguments that they simply have never been able to respond to, and they don't require any philosophical training or understanding at all. The first is, how do you get to the conclusion that it is the Christian God? You will not get an answer to that. All you'll get them to say is, well, you're not arguing for another God, so I'm not going to entertain the argument. They will admit that they dismiss the possibility of any other God, although the reasons for that are unclear, but I think are effectively based on it's not called presupposition for nothing. So that's the first counter. The second one is this. They use the idea that without the presupposition that the Christian God, the God of the Bible, exists, you cannot have logic, you not have science, you cannot have the law of uniformity. What they don't seem to understand is that their God performs miracles, and in doing so he obviously breaks the law of uniformity. He renders science redundant, because you cannot do any scientific, serious scientific discovery, because you have no idea whether what you're investigating is actually subject to one of God's miracles or not. And it obviously breaks down any form of inductive reasoning and logic itself. So the very nature of their God destroys their own argument. And if that's all we manage to get across during the course of the program, then I think that's a good thing, because, as I say, this is an argument we're going to hear more and more about.
You know, the thing is, seeing as how I host a panel that criticizes Islam on a bi-weekly basis, I suppose that there might be some bad blood between myself and the Muslim community at large. So as a peace offering, I'd like to offer a personal, heartfelt thank you to every Muslim in the world for not being Christian, because I'm so glad that I don't have to argue with Christians anymore on this program. Because Muslims never pull this argument, and in fact cannot pull this argument, that when a dispute comes about and some matter of their religion is under scrutiny, they don't say, well, I just got off the phone with God and he says you're wrong. They not only do not do that, but would be considered heretical for doing so because of what is contained in the Quran. See, Muhammad was just a little bit smarter than some of the prophets that came before him, and he said, I am the last prophet. If anyone else says that they talk to either God or an angel, they are a liar. Make short work of them. So the benefit is, I have not heard that argument even once from a Muslim ever, and I probably never will, and if I do, he'll be stoned to death or hanged the next week. So, I won't even have to worry about him. Okay, they cannot make that argument. But
well, that's handy.
That's convenient. Okay, I owe Mo one. Even though Mo himself used that argument in the Quran, he would say, and pardon me, it's been a while since I've read it, so this is going to be very loose paraphrasing. He says, his critics say that he is either making it up or he is hearing stories from, teachers who have access to this lore. And his response is, but tell them no, he is getting it from the Most High, the Most Wise. So his response is the same thing that Sai and Eric would say, is, nuh-uh, I'm getting it from God. And then that's it. He does nothing to address the implausibility of that, or the plausibility of the more mundane answer that his critics are proposing. But yeah, many Christians, certainly Venom Fang X did this when you brought him onto the MSS. He'd say, well, I have a desk in my mind, an office in my mind, and on the desk is a red phone, like the phone in the White House, and that little red phone goes directly to the heavenly Kremlin, and I can verify these things without any doubt and cannot be deceived, etc., etc. And it is incredibly infuriating. Stop or Kling, did you have anything?
Well, you will see this with Hamza, because I see that he is starting to follow this, where he is saying, we can't know anything about logics if we don't go and participate with Allah, because his version of God is the one who's going to be the only lawgiver and the giver of all logic. Without him, nothing works. But Mr. Jones, why is it that you had to give them, I mean, it seemed like an eternity, repeating the same stuff over and over and over again? Wouldn't 15 seconds they say it's only God, and then say thank you very much, cheers, and let's now talk about something else. I mean, letting them repeat this again and again and again, and then when people had an argument and said, well, this is impossible, this is stupid, I saw Aaron Ra hopping in front of the microphone, and then they repeated the same thing again. I thought, I cannot hear this anymore. Why did you let them go on and on and on?
Well, but stop.
Well, it's to be fair, it was a emotive program that was difficult to control. There were a number of people, more than we normally have, all of whom had strong views and all of whom were determined to express them. I think that it's very difficult to control what people are saying, but in my defense, I would say this. Every time he used the same argument, I did, maybe not every time, I did try and throw it back at him. But this is one of the things about presuppositionalists and the difficulty in confronting them, because I did actually do more homework than I would normally do in preparation for that program, because I wanted to try and understand what their position was. There's a very good podcast site, and I wish I could remember the name, but it may come to me. And they did a fairly lengthy program about their position, and they did say what you have to do with these people is attack from the get-go. If you allow them any latitude, then you're never going to get a second chance to come back at them. And I think that to that extent we did. I mean, I was supposed to be impartial. Obviously, I wasn't, but my two questions were the two that I've just referred to, about why it's a Christian God and why miracles don't absolutely destroy their position. Concordance then went into a very eloquent speech. After that, it was impossible to control. Yes, they did repeat themselves, but what am I supposed to do? Say, no, we've heard this before. Well, I'm sure I recall myself saying that many times during the course of the program. And also, you don't want to appear to be too hostile to these people. Otherwise, they will just use that as, ammunition. I mean, let me give you one example. I already know that Eric is doing this. When he turned up at the Reason Rally and did all the interviews that he did, he's doing that to make a DVD. It already has a title, and it is already being offered for sale at $24.99. And I know that he will employ sharp editing tactics to do that. he would also, he requested before, during the course of agreeing to appear on the programme, he wanted to be able to use the footage of the show, which of course is not a problem because it's available to anyone on YouTube. But he will more than likely try and use parts of that show for his DVD, and I don't think that having a very hostile, aggressive stance, such as Aaron portrayed for parts of the show, is particularly helpful, because you know that they're just going to use it against you. So I take your point. I don't see I could have done much more to stop them.
No, I would. Okay, my suggestion here would have been to use something what Thunderfoot came up with, which I thought was brilliant, and then say, okay, put the two next to each other and compare them stroke for stroke, and look at what the ghost who can never lie, and the God that can never lie, and Muhammad that can never lie. Put them next to each other and compare the different attributes, and go and see how they compare and how similar they actually are, and then compare how you laugh at the one and the other one you take seriously.
But stop, you don't even know if the universe exists.
Well, this is why I would go and say start very small. Take the ghost and this presupposed God.
Almighty comes up with a very good point. That's what they kept on throwing out, and every time that they did that, I tried to throw it back at them and say, well, you don't know that you're not being fooled. You're not in the Matrix. And they never actually came up with any compelling argument against that.
No, that was true. That was a big hiccup. Yeah.
What they said was, no, it has been revealed to us in a way that we can be sure.
Yeah, like
and
a mantra,
it's like, well, how has it been revealed to you? Well, it just has been. And, it's only so many times you can ask that question without it becoming tedious. And then, of course, there'll be other people wanting to express their views. But, I mean, this is the difficulty with dealing with these people, because they will refuse to accept there is any neutral ground. You have to accept their position before you can have a conversation with them. And once they've adopted that stance, it is very difficult to have any meaningful dialogue with them whatsoever. I mean, one of the most outrageous things I thought was a Sai who refused to talk about the contents of the Bible until we accepted his worldview and his God and the Bible was true and everything. And then at the end of the program, I don't know whether you got to part 9, or I think it was part 8 actually, he then starts, when he was leaving, he then starts trying to preach, and sort of like came out with all this flowery God loves you and read the Bible and everything. And I just cut it out of the video that was posted onto YouTube out of outrage. I mean, it was just, how dare he be so duplicitous?
Yeah, I mean,
you thought
I
that
think it was a
mistake?
mistake for you to cut it out. The duplicity, I think, would have been apparent with or without it. But now you know what they're going to say. They're going to say, "Oh well, so you censored it. Oh, you didn't want to hear about Jesus. Oh, it was like holy water being doused on you or whatever." Yeah, I mean, there were a lot of infuriating things. His unwillingness to discuss the Bible was very telling about his level of sincerity. He must be at least somewhat read in it, and I base that on the fact that he's reluctant to talk about it, because everyone I've known who has charged in to the battleground of biblical discussion and exegesis and so forth, they've been completely ignorant of anything that it says. They've learned a few
I'm sorry to cut through you, Almighty.
Letters, and that's it.
I'm sorry to cut through you, Almighty, but that's exactly the point. This is why we are going to hear more and more people trying to use this argument, because it gets them off the hook of actually defending either evidentially their God or the contents of the Bible. They will simply say, no, I am not talking to you unless you accept my position. It's a great tactic. I mean, it's intellectually just retarded, but it's a great tactic, and they use it deliberately. I actually called him, well, I suggested that his approach was one of cowardice, because he was looking for a way out of having to defend his Bible at one point. So, I mean, again, I'm perhaps trying to defend myself too much, but, these points were put to him, but what can you do? If someone says, no, I'm not going to talk about this argument unless you accept that I'm right,
Yeah.
it's...
Well, the thing is, like, when we had Nadir Ahmed with his Quranic scientific miracles, or inerrancies or what have you, it was pretty apparent where he had knowledge and where he didn't, because of the relative boldness with which he approached the different subtopics. You know, for example, the big one, I think, was when he said that, well, according to the Quran, there are no lights at the bottom of the sea. And he said that this was some sort of miraculous prediction. Now, the fact that he charged headlong into the subject showed that he had no knowledge, obviously, of marine biology or of earth sciences in general, because the whole chat was just lighting up incoming ponage, and of course we all brought up the topic of bioluminescence and you know, undersea trenches that give off light, you know, from the volcanic activity underneath the seafloor. And he had nothing to come back with other than, that's the first I've heard of it, which of course went without saying. But then when Sai tries to, you know, not take the bait and engage in the mire of biblical discourse, which, face it, when you're a believer and you have any kind of these holy books that are so bizarre and so at odds with observable fact, then, you know, this is why I study, you know, the scripture of these various religions, is because to engage them on that, especially, I mean, even if you're not that much more knowledgeable than they are, it's like fighting someone when they're in a swamp at the bottom of a valley, surrounded by high ground, with the sun in their eyes and the wind in their faces. It's completely to their disadvantage. I mean, he would have been terrified. Another thing, real quick, before I kick it off to Stop and Kling. There was one point where Thunder brought up the subject of the Hoven theory, in which, and this is the founder of their ministry who came up with this, a meteor, according to him, struck the earth long ago, causing Noah's flood and shattering a barrier of ice and fog or moisture around the earth, which collapsed only at the poles, and all kinds of, and according to him, the earth wobbled around and resettled in its orbit in such a way that it drastically altered its climate, and all manner of utterly absurd, insane things that a normal, healthy person would need a good dose of peyote to come up with. Truly a rival for Nephilim's lunar bukkake theory, and you could hear the fear in Sai's voice when he quickly said, "Let's take the next caller." And you took the next caller, and I nearly fell out of my chair in exasperation.
There were two reasons for that. Firstly,
I'm still listening, but I'll be up. Okay.
Yeah. Firstly, we had in mind to try and deal with two issues. One was the presuppositional arguments that were being advanced by them, and the second was whether, because Eric has adopted this new style of argument, whether he still stands by his father's arguments. And that was the purpose of the very first questions that I posed to him at the beginning of the show. And, you know, typically you don't get a straight answer from him. He said, well, you know, some of them, yes, I still use scientific arguments, but, you know, don't tar me with all of my father's arguments and whatever. And at the point, and I know that Thunder was desperate to bring this up during the course of the program, but at the stage that came up, it was very much towards the end, and it would have been totally impractical. I think we were already over the, you know, time that we should have ended. It would have been impractical to seek to have brought up a new topic. Yeah, it's regrettable, but I very strongly suspect that the response we would have got is, I am not talking about science, because unless you accept my God exists, you're not in any position to talk about science, because you don't know anything and you can't be absolutely certain about anything and you don't know the universe exists. That is the great get-out clause that this form of argument gives them, and I have no doubt that they would have played that card. So yeah, it would have been nice, it would have been fun, it would have been shooting fish in a barrel, sure, but I don't think we would have got to that point. That's the problem.
Yeah. Okay, let me just say one thing, because I don't want to hog the mic all the time. There's three things I want to mention, because DPR, look, one thing I admire is that you kept your cool. You did not get into the argument. You tried to do exactly what you do well, and that is to moderate. The second thing is you were able to stay on top of it. You did not get drawn down to that level, but you stayed on top and you kept the overview. And thirdly, you still manage to get in points, and that is what I admire what you did during that moderation, because I think it's unfair to only criticize. I think the positive aspects should be mentioned in the same way, and that is what I admired about what you did. I liked the different arguments that came in, and I liked the way that the whole thing was shown to be ridiculous. So anybody with 2 brain cells will know that this is absolute stupidity. Whether or not we get this in the future or not, I don't know.
Well, that's very kind of you, and I also appreciate Captain Disguise's comment that an English accent makes you sound smart. He could have said it makes you smart, but no, it makes me sound smart. I guess that will have to do. Thank you.
Klingschor, you've been quiet. Do you have anything to add? Or, I mean, you didn't watch the show, so, but...
Yes, so I can't really comment on this debacle. Just regarding the topic in general, I actually thought about this as I was reading a uni text last night, the night before, and it was talking about the Middle Ages during the Crusading era and the sale of indulgences. And as I read it, it suddenly hit me, because I'm not religious, I just don't believe in this nonsense. And so when I read about how they were selling indulgences, it was just the most bizarre thing ever. It was like, I just realized that the people buying the indulgences sincerely believed, because there is no... This was an example. This is an instance where you couldn't hide it. Like, if you were secretly not religious, or you just didn't really take it seriously, you just rock up to church for the warm fuzzy feeling of the sense of community, you wouldn't buy indulgences. The only reason that someone would waste money on buying a guarantee to heaven is if they really believed it. And so it was just a funny feeling, and it just sort of raises the question of for me, how much is sincere and how much is simply, I don't know, lies that everyone's telling themselves on purpose, and everyone's sort of in on the game, and everyone knows, And I guess with indulgences, that was an example of where it was legitimate. People legitimately believed in this kind of nonsense. Maybe the church didn't. Maybe the people selling the indulgences were having a laugh. But all the people buying them, this is an instance where they just had to have been believers. They couldn't have been anything else.
This is Catholic indulgences, yeah?
Yes, sorry, Catholic.
Was there ever a similar trend of...
In Islam?
Yeah, selling religious favors for cash?
I am afraid I have no idea. There may have been, but I'm not aware of it.
Yeah.
It has different... See, Islam and Christianity is structured differently. With Christianity, you need the church to save you, to get you into Jesus, to save you from original sin, or else you're screwed. Islam just doesn't have the same system. So it would be hard, I think, for Islam to set up a similar system. But I'm sure that some Muslims could manage it.
Yeah, but hang on, Muslims have an account with their God, don't they?
Yes, but there is no church body which has the special function of you. Like with Christianity, you have to go through the church. If you don't, you're going to hell. You actually have to go through the church. Islam doesn't have that.
Oh, I see. Okay, I see where the difference is. Okay.
So the church can say, yes, only by our discretion do you go to heaven, because that's in Christianity, that's true. You only go to heaven through our discretion, and you can buy our discretion. Like, Islam just doesn't have that.
Is also there.
Yeah, but it's like... It's not like
as far as I'm aware, there was nothing exactly like that. There were of course the poor rates, but I mean it seems like at the height of its power in the medieval era, the Muslim Empire was so rolling in cash that such a thing would be superfluous, and also because
Which Muslim empire?
Okay, now here's the thing: some people have equated the Caliph and the Caliphate to the papacy, and now from what I've read, many scholars consider that erroneous, and that he was just head of state of a particular religious empire, and that there really wasn't much of a pope or a real equivalent of a pope, that he was a political leader first.
That's not quite true. The Khalifa had both political and religious authority over all Muslims, in theory. I take it you're talking about the early period of the Arab Muslim Empire when it was actually still a single empire, even though, you had some minor states, but whatever. The caliphs actually, because Muslim society was a synthesis of Persian and Roman Empire. They were based on things that had come before in all aspects, in their architecture, in their administration, in coinage and so forth. It was all based on this pre-Islamic. Everything was pre-Islamic, but just given a new spin, which is how all societies work. We take the old and we refurnish it for our own purposes. So I'm not dissing them for that. But what happened was that the caliphs adopted the customs of the Byzantine emperors and the shahs. And the Byzantine emperors and the shahs were the official religio-political heads, official or unofficial, I'm not sure if the Byzantines are official, but they played the role, of Christianity and Zoroastrianism, respectively. And they screwed with the religions as they saw fit. The Shah would mandate X, Y, and Z. The Byzantine, or actually the Roman, they were still Roman, the Roman emperor of Christianity would, make a dictation. Yes, monophysitism is a heresy, or Nestorianism is a heresy, and so forth. Similarly, the Khalifas took on this role. And the most famous example is El-Mamun, and the Mihna? The Inquisition that he set up. He said, Mu'tazila is Islam. If you're not Mu'tazila, you will be persecuted and oppressed and silenced and thrown into jail and tortured. You must be Mu'tazila. And that's an example of how Islam did have a pope. He had more power than most popes. More direct political power than most popes. I mean, how many popes could implement their diktat directly all throughout Europe? They had to rely on, the kings complying.
Right. So I think that because he held political power and could simply gather taxes and things like this, or even use prescriptions like the Roman emperors did, he probably didn't need to go use. I mean, the papacy really kind of set the tone for religious fundraising in the Western world. In that, of course, since he doesn't collect taxes directly, and the tithes just aren't enough because God has a hole in his pocket and just always needs more money, they just found any way they could to raise more revenue. Now, someone in the chat raised the issue of the Hajj and how the Hajj, the global pilgrimage, is a great cottage industry for the Hijaz. I wouldn't equate
it also spreads plague.
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah. But I mean, they didn't know. They thought the plagues were caused by demons, and how better to cleanse yourself of demons than to take part in a holy pilgrimage, right? But I would not equate that with the selling of indulgences. I do think that, nowadays, we're seeing, because both Christianity and Islam are a bit more decentralized than they were back in the day. Of course, the Catholic Church is still a powerful entity, but even then, its grip over the individual is a bit looser. Now you're seeing many more of the Peter Popoff types, wherein Christians will sell their holy water, and a Muslim personality on TV will come up and sell Zamzam water, and there's a lot of this by hook or by crook getting money into the hands of various people claiming to represent the religion, and especially the one true version of the religion, and it seems like it seems like Christianity led the way in this regard in terms of the sort of shameless commercialization. But of course, like I said, now at least Muslim enterprises that are represented in the Western civilization, and from what I've heard, if you live in an Arab country, there's or any Muslim majority country, there's all kinds of stuff on TV trying to sell you products with the word Islam. see, slapping Islamic on a label in the Middle East or South Asia, it's a little bit like putting organic or all natural on a label in the West. It just, you can sell it for 10. If you have a lemonade stand and you're selling lemonade for 10 cents a cup, and then someone opens up a lemonade stand next to it that says Islamic lemonade for $1. they have a smaller audience, but they have a captive audience, it seems, and they may end up making more money than you in the long run.
Halal.
Yeah, I mean, Frank and I were talking about Muslim banking, and I was asking him questions about that, and there is, to a large extent, no real difference, except for the acceptable rate that they can charge. In other words, I hope this isn't too off topic for everyone, but I was really curious about Islamic banking and how it, how's that word pronounced, riba? The concept of forbidden interest, riba?
Yeah, Riba.
Riba, or whatever. I read things and I don't know how to pronounce them, so there you go. Riba, I don't know. Anyway, there's this, I believe it's in the Quran, but at least it's in the Hadith. There's a part where it says that Allah has permitted trade and forbidden interest, and the word they use is riba. And so, that might work in a small community where, people say, okay, don't lend anyone anything for interest. Okay, if you lend a friend $10, he only has to pay you back $10. Okay, but obviously, as enterprises get larger, banks are no longer, banking institutions such as we know them really can't exist. It's essentially a ban on fractal reserve banking in the first place, so it's not in their interest. An individual depositor, if should he hold their money in the bank, cannot collect interest on his deposits, and there's no incentivizing for this sector to develop. So what they did is they developed a system wherein they say, okay, well, under Islamic banking, we are not going to charge interest. What we are going to do is everything will be justified in that it is a trade. So just like an Arab in the Hijaz would buy Indian goods from South Arabs and then go up and sell it for more to the Byzantines or Persians, right? And they would, of course, would charge more, and that's that's the cost of transporting it. And of course, like I said, trade is allowed. Buying low and selling high, perfectly legitimate. So what they would do is, okay, if you want to buy a house, for example, the bank buys the house, and then you buy it from them at a higher price and on a payment plan, and they don't call it interest. But they have various different workarounds that it sort of evens out and becomes the same deal. But apparently, they can charge a hell of a lot more because they have people by the short hairs if they think it is religiously required of them. So again, this goes back to my Islamic lemonade thing. There's nothing forbidden about lemonade, but if you say Islamic lemonade, some people will pay through the nose for it. And I think that, of course, this is in terms of modern chicanery and the Peter Popoff styles. I still think that Christianity definitely led the way in the sort of desperate panhandling measures that they took, and now we see that sort of backwash.
Can I chip in?
Yes,
can
please.
I chip in on that one? Just going back to the selling of indulgences. I mean, this was a shameless racketeering. I mean, it was just outrageous. But unlike the criminals that had to pay the henchmen to do the dirty work if someone didn't actually pay the debt, the great thing about religion and the racket that they have is they don't need the henchmen, because they indoctrinate you into this belief that you have this fear of hell hanging over you, which is far more frightening for most people, I imagine, than a henchman coming to recover a debt. As for Islam, I don't know enough about it, but I very strongly suspect that the same sort of pressures that Christian churches impose upon their congregation also are imposed upon the Muslims that attend mosques. Do you ever hear of a church saying anything other than, oh, we need some money, please donate? When do you see these people actually giving out money? All churches seem to be in a desperate state of financial precariousness. They all need money. I mean, George Carlin did a wonderful sketch about how God always needs money. So yeah, I imagine that if there aren't similar things to indulgences, there is still going to be the social pressure for a Muslim to donate to his mosque or whatever the equivalent may be.
Yeah, but look what they do is they go and say, give us money for the children in Somalia. And then remember this video with the rationalizer when he said, okay, let me call in. And they said, well, rather give us the money because every soul that we save is worth more than the child in Somalia.
Red camels, red camels.
Yeah, you get exactly. Yeah, you get free. Well, there is one of the 5 pillars of Islam, which are, of course, the central tenets, is the doctrine of zakah, which is sometimes translated as the poor rate, and it's a donation that is required under religious doctrine, not always by political fiat. It's required of all Muslims who are not destitute and too poor to pay it, and they give forward this portion of their income, and it's supposed to go through the religious institutions and help the poorest of the people of the Ummah, the Muslim diaspora, right? Now, of course, historically, this was not necessarily how it was spent, and today there are a lot of different organizations that say, well, you can give to us and it counts as zakah, and unless you do your research, it's very easy to get conned out of. Well, I mean, your money's gone either way, but the point is, it doesn't always go to who you think it goes to. There are Islamic charities that do good work. I think that needs to be recognized, but unfortunately, it is an industry rife with fraudulent claims.
Look at the
Well,
books
can I
being
just
distributed
give
in Germany.
a premature
300,000.
shout out for Thunderfoot's next video? That's something to look out for when we're talking about religious people taking money for doing nothing. I don't know. I know he's in the room and I know he's listening. I don't know whether he's actually posted it. He was getting close to it, but I'll say no more about it at the moment.
Okay, stop. You had something?
No, I just wanted to say, look at how they spend the money. They collect the money and then they print 300,000 Qurans, which they distribute in Germany at the moment for free, which is an old translation, 30 years old, highly controversial, and they're spending, I don't know how many thousands and hundreds of thousands on things like that.
Someone has said that there's someone named Nirmal Baba in India who sells goodwill of the gods to people for $100 per person and has over 3 million followers or more. So in Hinduism, it's also problematic. Not surprising that they also have that. But I told him, for only $100, consider how many gods Hinduism has. I mean, that's less than $1 a god, at least. So that's a good deal. I'll be ordering 10. I don't know about you guys.
Sure.
Kling, you had something?
Well, there is a Muslim equivalent, somewhat, which Discuss Islam actually alerted me of via the chat, and he talked about how Sufis do have, the idea of saints and making prayers to the saints, and so actual Sufi mystics themselves sometimes will act as intercessors. They will intercede on behalf of people, to the saints, and thus they can, and some Sufi leaders even claim to have like a hotline to God, and so in this way they have the exact ability to do as the church did and to sort of offer indulgences.
But I think Almighty raises a very interesting point. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, fine. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think you raise a very interesting point as to what proportion of the believers are acting honestly. I suspect a lot do. I think they're misguided when they're collecting money to build a bigger church. They probably think they're doing the right thing. I don't think that you would be able to say that those people were acting dishonestly. I think they're acting misguidedly. The likes of Popoff, Benny Hill, and that sort of people, undoubtedly, they are knowingly dishonest. I wouldn't like to put a figure on it. Complete crooks in well, I don't know. I mean, I would say that the Pope is a crook, but that doesn't mean all Catholics are. I think it's very difficult to judge, but it's an interesting point.
Well, what Kling said about people printing Qurans in lieu of handing out food and so forth. I remember I received a brochure of some kind in the mail, and it was a Christian charity asking for money, and they actually itemized the things. You didn't just pay cash. You were essentially buying things from a gift catalog for people living in the third world. And it was really quite disturbing because they itemized all the things you could buy. You could buy them some grain, you could buy them a goat, you could buy them a cow, you could buy them, and they had how much each thing cost. Or you could buy them Bibles. And it was some time ago, but I remember breaking down the math of how many people I could feed for the cost of a Bible. And it was really quite disturbing to think that, obviously it's better for people to give to people in this need than not give anything. But,
well, Almighty, let me ask you this. Do you think that the Christian organizations that sought to help after the Haiti earthquake, and their help was effectively bringing them radio or wind-up Bibles so they could listen to them, do you think that would you describe that as dishonest, or do you think that that was just misguided?
Well, were they also providing more concrete forms of help?
I'm not entirely sure they were.
Well, it's sincere.
I think that they thought they were doing the right thing.
Well, I mean, it's completely unnecessary because, as Seitan Bruggencate says, everybody in the world already knows that there's a God and it's the Christian God. So they were wasting all of their funds. They should have just handed out food. But, I mean, in all seriousness, yeah, I don't even know, is the literacy rate in... Oh, no, it's wind-up. It's audio. So yeah. It doesn't matter what their literacy rate is. So, yeah, you're going to get people the word.
Now, I have to think that if I was suffering in Haiti, I would like MSF to come and see me rather than a Christian organization with a wind-up Bible.
Yep.
Well, yeah, but, I mean, there's no doubt that it's disturbing... honestly, I'd have to think that the individual missionaries would have to be sincere, because otherwise there's just no rationale for it. If you don't have that mental block in place caused by the dogma, I don't see how they could ever live with themselves for it. So I would say that the missionaries are sincere. Yeah. Because otherwise we'd have to say that they're going down there and handing out Bibles and not food and just taking the piss.
Well, I mean, Christopher Hitchens made that allegation against Mother Teresa, didn't he? And it was not simply an ad hom attack. It was justified. She was going around raising money for the Catholic Church, accepting gifts from all sorts of hideous people, and using it in a most outrageous way that wasn't helping anyone. As he said, I think he said. She wasn't someone who loved the poor, she loved poverty, and she made her life out of it. And the Catholic Church exploited her in doing that. And I think that you cannot look at that situation and say that there is not some form of dishonesty going on there.
Yeah, that reminds me of, and when I first heard Christopher Hitchens' allegations against Mother Teresa, I thought this was sort of knee-jerk contrarianism, and I thought, well, at first I categorically did not believe Hitchens until, like many things I hear that upset me, it prompts me to do more research, and then I found out that a lot of, Mother Teresa, if anyone has seen that movie Slumdog Millionaire, where there's a guy blinding children so that they'll make better beggars, I think that's essentially what Mother Teresa was, and it's amazing. She really was a monstrous figure. I don't know. Whether she was sincere, I think there was some sincerity, because wasn't it Mother Teresa who said one time in a memoir she published that she had never heard the voice of God, that she believed and she prayed, but she never heard the voice of God back?
Yes, it was very much along those lines, and it was towards the end of her life, but it was published while she was still alive. And Hitchens had published his criticisms of her before that book was published. Right. And then you had, what's his name, that idiot Catholic person that was trying to defend her on Fox News. Oh, doesn't matter, we're getting slightly sidetracked.
So maybe she was a true zealot.
I think she was exploited to a large degree by the church.
Anyway.
By the Catholic Church, but this program's supposed to be about Islam, so I'm sorry, I don't want to... Bill Donahue, thank you very much, Captain Disguise, thank you.
It's fine, it's comparing and contrasting as well. I remember every time I tried to talk about Islam on the Magic Sandwich Show, you'd be like, blah, no. So I started my own show, so there. Anyway, Frank, thank you for joining us. Frank has done some research some research on Muslim apologists, both old and new, and has some comments prepared. So take it away, Frank.
Actually, new. Yeah, it's mostly about modern apologists and scholars. And I've just listed some reasons that might be sufficient for suspecting their sincerity. And these are not for all Muslim scholars, and specifically for Wahhabis and Salafis, with whom I am more familiar. So there's one thing that is common all over this. They keep warning their flocks against studying or even thinking about events or concepts that bring doubt. For example, fatalism versus free will. Did God decide everything beforehand? Or the conflict between the Sahaba. The common thing that they would say to laymen, do not think about these things or study them. And they would invoke the verse, Surah 5, 101, which says, O you who have believed, do not ask about things which, if they are shown to you, will distress you. And then there's also another strategy that's used also by some apologists, which is to suppress even sahih hadiths that may arouse skepticism or among the audience. One example is in a book by a Saudi preacher called Al-Arifi. He is very famous in the Arab world and has over 1 million followers on Twitter. And in one of his books called it's about the end times, and it says, and he says, quote, not everything known about end time stories is to be said or published, because they can be easily misunderstood by the layman. And this is obvious that they know that there's something laughable or contradictory or blatantly false about what they're saying, but they probably use these strategies to suppress thought.
Well, can I butt in really quick? Sure. You were talking about some of the more difficult to believe hadiths that nevertheless have remained sahih, that's considered
yes.
authentic by Islamic jurors. Now, you know, Bukhari and Muslim, Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim have for over 1,000 years been considered by unanimity of the four major Sunnah schools to be entirely authentic. And they contain so many different psychedelic passages. Originally, the format that we were considering for this episode was Stop was going to argue the case against Muhammad's sincerity, and that I would do my best to play devil's advocate. But we scrapped that format because I just did not want the job. I mean, it was... I looked at various apologists who addressed this question, including some arguments from our old friends at the IERA, and you know, one of the things that is often put forward, or one of the main stories from the folklore that it occurs both in Bukhari and in Muslim and in other sources, I believe it's also in the Sirah by Ibn Ishaq, is the story of the heart washing. There, at 2 points in Muhammad's life, according to the tradition, once when he was a little child, an angel came, like sort of sedated him, opened up his chest, took out his heart, removed some sort of an obstruction, and then washed it with what's called Zamzam water from a well in Mecca that's supposed to be blessed water, right? So he washes his heart, puts it back in his chest, and seals him up, and bestows him with an infusing of wisdom and temperance and things like this, and then he just goes about. And later on in his life, after he had become the prophet of Islam, he again has an incident that before he undergoes what's called the Miraj. It's in English it's often called the night journey. And again, he has his chest opened up as a grown man, has his heart taken out, given another good rinsing, put back in his chest, and at this point he gets on the back of I think it's called a burak. It's a creature.
Yes.
It's
flying
like,
bat donkey.
it's sometimes described as the body of either a donkey or a horse or something, but it's a little bit larger, and it has the tail of a peacock, the wings of a bird, and the head of, I think, a woman or some sort of person. Now, this creature, it is said, when it takes one stride, it travels as far as the eye can see. So he gets on the back of this creature, and he travels first from, I think he's in Medina at the time, he travels to Jerusalem, and does some stuff there. Then he travels up to the lowest of the seven heavens, and then once he's there, he kind of parks that creature and goes and meets different prophets in the different different layers of heaven, ultimately meeting Moses at the highest level. Then he comes back down, gets back on the creature, and flies back in the space of a single night. Now, when I first read this, I thought, there's no way I will ever find a Muslim who will take this literally. And I was astounded by how many are actually willing to countenance this as though it actually happened. Including one person who told me that the way he was able to travel such a distance in a single night was that the creature, the Burak, was able to travel so fast that under special relativity, a sort of time dilation set in, and some people say it traveled at near the speed of light, and some have actually told me that the Burak travels faster than the speed of light, and therefore it was able to, all of these things were able to, it was able to travel this vast distance in a short amount of time due to Einstein, the theory discovered by Einstein and Poincaré and others about time dilation and travel in and around the speed of light. And that's how he was able to do all this stuff, and to everyone else who was around, it just looked like he went to bed and then got up the next day and nothing happened. But in one, I guess, approximately 8-hour period, he was able to do all that. And
beam me up, Moses.
Yeah, that should be a t-shirt. And the thing is, when someone tells you that someone's heart has been washed in this manner, I mean, that alone is pretty remarkable. But then the person who told you, again, Muhammad, who claims that happened, he then claims that he went through this fantastical journey, and then I get treated to a lecture about how honest a man he was and how he would never lie and never make things up. And I don't know, how do you come back to that? Klingschor, you got a comment?
Well, see, I actually will argue that Muhammad, given that we agree that he exists and that we can derive some substantial materials from the hadith literature, I would actually posit that he was sincere, and I will argue that. So shall we actually give it a shot? Would you like me to actually lay out my reasons for thinking that Muhammad was not a fraud, but was in fact believed what he was peddling? Okay, well, I'm actually going to have to lay out a bit of structure for this. So, my reasons for believing that Muhammad was sincere actually tie into my criterion for actually establishing what is approximately authentic and what is false in the hadith literature, independent of isnads and just little things like, was the commentator a good Muslim, was he pious, blah blah, this kind of nonsense that al-Bukhari took into account, and so forth, ignoring the isnad system completely. So basically, everything begins with the fact that Muhammad is described as being mentally ill, or at least Muhammad is described in the hadith literature and in the seerah as having visual and auditory hallucinations. I'm sure we all know about them. The humming noises in his ears, the ringing bell noises in his ears, the incredible pain, he'd sweat really heavily, he'd go crimson and fall on the ground and lose control of his body, or he'd hear a great cacophony like the sound of metal being beaten. He saw all kinds of amazing things, like angels sitting in a chair in midair, or an angel filling the sky, or an angel attacking him and saying, read, and so forth. His heart would beat wildly, etc., etc., etc. And the reason why I think this is authentic is because the hadiths were written down approximately in between, say, if I recall correctly, 800 to 900 is when most of the hadith collections were written. 800 to 900. Now, Christians were all read at this time, like, with as early as, let's see if I can recall his name.
Kling, let me interrupt you. Your audio is getting really fuzzy. I'm going to hang up on you and call you again. And then, if you can finish that, I interrupted Frank in the middle of his presentation and went on a long diatribe. So I'm going to kick it back to him as soon as you wrap up this point. But I'm going to call you. I'm going to call you back, okay? Because hopefully it'll reset your audio.
Sure. Go ahead.
Okay.
So it was not only me.
Kling, are you testing?
Yes, here I am.
Okay, much better, much better. You don't sound like a robot anymore. Okay, so go
fantastic.
for it. Christians at that time, you were saying?
Like as early as Theophanes, the Confessor, a Byzantine historian, monk, chronicler, who was living, who lived from approximately 760 to 818. So living, like, he dies just as the hadiths are begin to be written down, and he labeled Muhammad as an epileptic. So consider this. These hadiths were being written down in a context where Christians, and so the general populace of the Middle East at the time, because it took many hundreds of years for the majority to become Muslim, general populace were aware of things like mental illness. And so, despite the fact that these hadiths portrayed Muhammad in a profoundly negative fashion, and that even before the hadiths were actually being written down, you know, Muhammad was being labelled an epileptic, despite this, Muslims still recorded all of these stories about Muhammad experiencing all these mental problems. And so to me, it's like the satanic verses. They tried to hide those. Only El-Tabari actually ended up recording them, and so forth. It's one of those things where the fact that it was recorded and the fact that it was recorded in the face of the fact that it's so negative and it has such a negative image for Islam.
Real quick before we come over to Frank, so Theophanes definitively says that it was a medical problem and not spiritual intervention of any kind.
He says that Muhammad was an epileptic.
Okay, so they even had a diagnosis of that condition back in the day?
Yes, he refers to it somewhat cryptically, but that is what he says.
Because I have a hard time finding out.
This is a very, very common theme. Since Theophanes, I think, was the first, it's very common for Christians throughout the Middle Ages, beginning in this very early era, to call Muhammad an epileptic.
Well, because
this was very common.
Most modern Christians, most people from, I don't know, not most. Let me back up away from that assertion. People of the Psi and Eric school of thought, you know, fundies basically in Christianity, they say he was possessed by a demon. It was Satan whispering in his ear. And they base this off of he was teaching something different than what the Bible says, ergo, etc., etc. Right? But, I mean, so even back in the day, they had someone at least level-headed to make a mundane, assertion about that. But yeah, that's all I hear from Christians nowadays. It's like, oh, it was the devil. Allah is really the devil. That's all I ever hear from them.
Yeah. Ditto.
So let's go back to Frank. Frank, sorry about that long interruption. I was actually trying to build on something you said, and I went on a completely irrelevant tangent, as I often do.
No problem. Okay, so I'll go back to the modern apologists. Last thing I was talking about is the suppression of hadiths. And then also there's an example is also from a sheikh called Munajjid. He's also a prominent Wahhabi sheikh in Saudi Arabia. He once said, quote, "Freedom of thought leads to freedom of heresy. And once freedom of thought is granted, they will ask for for freedom of speech to spread this heresy. I mean, if it comes from someone who believes that his faith could be rationally justified, or that every human being is born with an innate predisposition to believe actually in his religion, that is a blatant contradiction. And then he goes on to say, this very same person would say, we, the ulama, sign on behalf of the most merciful. That they have, and this shows that there is a trend, especially within those who are associated with the state or with the Wahhabi, it's becoming more like Christian, a few who have esoteric knowledge, who can only be the ones who interpret the Quran and so on, or issue fatwas, and then also their obsession with the temporal benefits, with money and with prestige, and I mean, there's now, and with all the televangelism, Islamic televangelism that's taking place now, there are hundreds of channels devoted to religion, and there's like a fierce competition between them, all for money, using SMS messages to send and get money, and that all, I mean, leads us to question their sincerity. Examples would be Quranic healing also on their channels, where people call on paid services, like the ones where they call for phone sex or something. They would pay very high rates to inquire about dream interpretation according to Islamic tradition. Well, if you see, I don't know, if you see yourself dead, that means you're gonna whatever, if you see, and so on. And then there's also prophetic medicine, people selling all sorts of things based on religion. And I think, I mean, and some would make fantastic shows with all those sound effects and things. Some of them, had there been no religion in the area, they would have been either great stage actors or maybe catch me if you can style con artists.
Now, Zamzam water is a hot item on shows like that, right?
Oh, no, Zamzam is nothing compared to the herbs that are from the Quran or from Hadith, and then and then they also have other things that are packaged with it that are not necessarily Quranic, but the person who markets them is an Islamist. And by the way, there were Ponzi schemes in the 80s and stuff like that, also by people claiming to be preachers or Islamists and so on. And then also, if we look also among Wahhabis, segment of them who are official, who are with the state, they shift their positions radically. One of clear example is what happened during the second Gulf War, when Saudi Arabia had to enter in an alliance with an infidel state, that is the United States, against supposedly Muslim state, that is Iraq, and the Mufti at the time issued a fatwa that says it is okay, it is halal to side with the Americans against Iraq, and that caused, by the way, that caused a rift, and that was the time when Al-Qaeda became militant against the Saudi regime. But still, they shift those. The Bin Baz shifted their position. I mean, people who would use the Quran for political reasons, change their opinions on whims of leaders or for money, how could they be sincere? And then there's a last example, which is very recent. There is, I wonder if you guys heard about the Egyptian presidential candidate, the Islamist Salafist, Hazem Salah Abu Ismail. Well, he was running for president, and just a few days ago, it turned out that he has hidden the fact that his mother had an American citizenship, and therefore he's not eligible.
So wait, he has no. This is in Egypt, you said?
Yeah, in Egypt, yes.
Well, but he has no non-Arab blood in his veins. He just has the citizenship.
No, yeah, his mother has the citizenship, and that makes him non-eligible according to Egyptian law. If one of your parents has a non-Egyptian citizenship, you cannot be eligible for. And so he lied. He hid the fact all the time and used all the demagoguery and lies and conspiracy theories. He is actually called among secularists Sheikh Pepsi, because he once mentioned this conspiracy that Pepsi stands for pay every penny to save Israel. And since then he's been called Sheikh Pepsi. Anyways, now it's that the conspiracy is between the US government and the Egyptian army because they are afraid of an Islamist, and it goes on. I mean, with all these, I deeply question their sincerity, and I think they're all con artists, liars, charlatans, with some exceptions, of course. I mean, one that I am certain that he is a sincere person is one called Al-Humaid. He was a Wahhabist who lived in Qasim. He never used anything that has to do with technology, modern technology. He used horses. He lived in a house built of old material, mud and so on. And that person denied himself all temporal things. He says, I believe everything that is there, and all these things are the new technologies, the work of Satan. And the only useful knowledge is the knowledge of the Quran. That person may be sincere, but the other ones I doubt it highly.
Yeah, Satan is really probably the most prolific person ever in terms of all the things that he is credited with inventing and writing and doing. I mean, since he's gotten kicked out of heaven, he's really kept busy enriching our lives in all kinds of ways by making rock and roll music and the internet and satellites and community. I mean, anyway, yeah. Let's. DPR, did you have anything to say before we go? Let you go, because we're going to bring in. We have a bunch of backlog of casts.
Oh, I'm sure you do. Yeah, just very quickly. Again, going back to the issue that you raised about how sincere religious people are, and whether you can be religious, whether you can be good without religion. I think that religion does provide a useful conduit, if you like, for good people to sort of like channel their goodness. But there are other ways to do it. I'll leave you on that note. Thank you very much for having me. It's always been a pleasure.
Take care. Let's get rid of him. I'm going to bring in Yuri, who has been waiting a very long time, and he apparently has been doing some reading on the Quran and other documents and has some thoughts for us. You there?
Yes, hello.
Welcome to the show. Thanks for calling in.
Oh, thank you. First of all, too bad DPR left, because, I just wanted to... Hear me?
Yeah, you broke up for a second.
Okay.
Continue.
So, I mean, the Magic Sandwich show is great, but next time you have Richard Dawkins on, please record the show. I mean, check your recording equipment. It was so sad that we now can't watch it. Also, I have a question regarding, the previous Magic Sandwich show. I mean, to a person who says that, since you have, since you're arguing from rationality and reason, that therefore presupposes rationality and reason, and therefore your argument is circular. So what, how do we even answer such a silly question?
I've been talking a lot. Stop, Kling, Frank, you want this one? Stop, you've been quiet for a while.
I wouldn't know what to say to this.
I mean, the question is, how do you come back to this? How do you combat it?
I have no idea. I don't understand. Okay, what is the purpose of the question? Let me try it this way.
Okay, so their argument is circular because the Bible or the Holy Quran is used to prove the Holy Quran. Well, you use reason and rationality. And since you use reason and rationality to prove reason and rationality, therefore your argument is circular.
I see. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't.
I'll let.
No. It's religious people create a false comparison, saying, well, yes, yes, it's true that we use the Bible to prove the Bible, but you use science to prove science, so we're exactly the same. And I guess I don't know. There's probably some fancy philosophical response, but for me personally, science works. The Bible doesn't.
I agree.
Yeah, we use science to prove science because science has tangible, everywhere, in every single aspect of your life. It's having an effect where it actually works. Whereas the Bible, using the Bible, is just, I don't know, philosophical wankery.
Yes, I tried explaining that that the scientific method is a self-correcting, is evidence-based, but explain.
If your audio keeps breaking up, we may have to let you go and address your questions in text because you're cutting in and out. I think it's a good question that you raised, but like I said, if the technical problems continue.
Oh, okay, can you hear me?
Well, we can hear you now.
Okay, so any
Stop. Do you have anything? Because I probably have a rant on this when you're done.
Okay, what I understand is why is it that religious people use circular reasoning? Is that the question?
No, I think he's asking why did they accuse us of doing it?
Yes, don't you see? Is that they're saying that some religious people acknowledge the circular reasoning of yes, the Bible says it, and because the Bible says it, the circular reasoning. But then they say, but science and rationality are also circular because you use science and rationality to prove that science and rationality are scientific and rational.
Yes, I've heard that before, but it's not true. So this is just an assertion. It's stupid. It's the same as, Hamza always goes and rants and says, yeah, but science can't address mathematics. It's stupid. It's stupid. It's so ridiculously stupid that you can't address this. What do you do with it?
Okay, here's my 2 cents, which will probably last half an hour, knowing me. The reason they are framing the argument this way is because they consider science to be a single data point because they've never looked into it and know nothing about it. In other words, if they say, well, the Bible is true because God said so, because the Bible is true because God said so, and so forth, that's clearly circular, right? But science, of course, isn't a single data point. It's not even a single field. It's not even there's so you create a mesh of different observations from different vantage points, looking at it using both different individual methodologies, different instances, different control variable, and so forth. So it creates a very complex weave of interlocking observations and inductions, right? But they don't want to learn all that shit. So they just say science is science, and you can't use science to prove science. It would be like if someone were to say, and it wouldn't put it past me to hear someone like Eric or Sai say that, particularly Eric, who seems a little slow. If we were to give him a course on chemistry and say, okay, well, here's the periodic table, and this is what we know about hydrogen, and this is what we know about helium, and we use these different chemicals in different reactions with each other as catalysts and so forth, and we've even essentially created, see, they say, oh, you never create anything. We've essentially created or spawned somehow new radioactive materials and keep adding to the list, and we've confirmed the existence of things that cannot be seen, felt, that are odorless and tasteless, just by demonstrating that they react with other chemicals. And all these different things will demonstrate each other. The different reactions can be further tested and so forth until you have this complex weave of different interactions. And once upon a time, Greeks thought there was air, earth, fire, and water, and they were at the top of the scientific totem pole. But now, of course, we've one by one, you can look this up online easily, or a lot of almanacs will have this, the different dates at which different elements were confirmed to exist. And if an element hadn't been confirmed to exist up to that point, you needed it to react with something else in order to demonstrate its presence and by extension its existence, right? Eric would come back by saying, well, that's using chemistry to prove chemistry, because he didn't hear anything. While you were explaining the intricacies of the field and how well attested these different things are, he was just hearing the sound that the adults in the Peanuts cartoon used to make, because it's all over his head. He just sees it as one blanket field. And the thing is, in reality, you could reduce every argument to something this completely inane, because, you know, if you recognize the existence of a field called metaphysics that Aristotle and other people proposed, that would be a field of human knowledge and study and inquiry covering theology, philosophy, and science, all under one gigantic dome, one giant umbrella term, metaphysics, then someone could make any argument from any vantage point, and you could say that they were using metaphysics to prove metaphysics. Yuri, did you have one?
Yeah, I think the main point is to make small sound bites that they can simply cannot avoid, because if you start going on a rant, they will simply ignore it, and then they will just say, well, it doesn't explain this and it's circular, so you just have to make short, concise blows, I guess. I guess that would be better. Also, what I wanted to say is that I recommend that everybody reads the Quran, the Bible, the Baha'i Revelation. I recently read that and it's awesome. Also, read as many religious books as possible, especially using audiobooks, because reading the Bible just as a book and not as an audiobook would be, I think, very, very hard. Because, this person begat that person, and then they went on a war, and then somebody else begat another one, and then this goes on for like 30 minutes, and it's just impossible. As to the actual point of the show, I actually have Joseph Smith was an atheist, I think, at heart.
Okay.
Because there was this one passage in the Book of Mormon where there was an evil atheist called Klingschor, and he went to a city and he started saying that, oh, God doesn't exist and the church is just trying to take advantage of you and you're just wasting your time. So what they did was they bound him up and they took him to the king of that town. But since that town and since Mormonism presupposes religious freedom, which is actually a thing in Mormonism, so that's a plus for them. So they said, well, we can't do anything, so they just threw him out of the town to the next town. And in the next town, he did the same thing, but they bound him up and they took him to the king of a third town. And then the king was like, why do you deny the existence of God? And he was like, well, I simply lack faith. And he actually made that argument that, oh, he just lacks a belief. So understanding by Joseph Smith, I think he had some experience with that, because but then the sad truth is that God somehow shone through and he mouth, and that was the sign. And then from then on, Klingschor was a believer, but his mouth was sealed and he was forever despised. So that was a funny story from Mormonism.
Okay. Well, thank you for coming on the show. Take care. I'm going to let you go.
Bye.
Well, that reminds me. There's a story from the Bible. I think it was David is brought before this pagan king, and David's screwed because he's killed so many people in the army of this nation. So he messes up his hair and drools on himself and scratches at the door and pretends to be insane. And the king has a great line. He says, "Is our king so short of madmen that you bring them in from other countries? Get him out of here." And then, so we have enough technical problems without bringing in other people. Okay, so he was going to say.
Can I ask Frank a question?
Yeah.
Frank, you said earlier that Muhammad probably believed what he was preaching. That is one aspect of the sincerity. But another question is, was Muhammad the person that Muslims tell me that he would never have lied? Was he personally sincere in what he did and his actions when he claimed that he was poor and he would never be able to harm anybody?
I don't think he was sincere at all. I think Klingschor is the one who said that. Yeah, well, no, I mean, if we were to believe the attributes of Muhammad as told in through his deeds as told in the Muslim history books, he wasn't. It doesn't seem that he was a sincere person at all. I mean, especially if you look at the works of Muslim revisionists in the 20th century, like Ma'ruf al-Rusafi, for example. Actually, he makes very interesting observations about even Muhammad's network of spies, and those are enough to, I think, question his sincerity. Even if, and all are based on authority historians.
Okay, what about the contradiction that in the Quran it says that the Kaaba, for example, is a protected area, and that you are safe in this area of the Kaaba, and then Muhammad has people that he didn't like killed there, well, he didn't kill them himself, he had them killed. Do you see a discrepancy there as well, between the Quran and what he did personally?
Well, are you sure about that? Which verse do you think about of it being a protected area?
Well, the Quran says that he has created Mecca and the Kaaba as a protected area, as a safe area for Muslims. And then Muhammad has people killed there.
I see what you're saying. It's supposed to be a sanctuary.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I guess it doesn't apply to non-Muslims. It's probably the simplest and probably best answer.
And that is my question, whether there is a discrepancy between what the Quran commands and what Muhammad actually does.
I thought the traditional story is that when Muhammad entered Mecca, he said, whomever enters the Grand Mosque is safe, whomever stays in his own house is safe, and whomever enters Abu Sufyan's house is safe. That's the traditional story, that they didn't harm anyone, and that Khalid ibn al-Walid did had a quarrel somewhere, but then he was Muhammad. Did not like what he did, and that's the story that I'm familiar with. Yeah, there was one person who was said that should be killed that day. That is Abdullah ibn Abi Surah, the man who used to write the Quran for Muhammad and then realized he was a fraud.
Oh, I remember him. He was the Lucy Harris of Islam, wasn't he?
He was excluded from the amnesty during the day of Mecca.
And where was he killed?
Wasn't. He ran away until later on he was appointed governor of Egypt by Uthman.
Ah, okay. Then I'm thinking of a different person, because I was thinking of the person who had a similar story and who was later killed, or who was assassinated by a henchman of Muhammad's.
So wait, this is the same guy who he said something poetic, and Muhammad told him to write it down, that it had been revealed, and then he ended up fleeing for his life.
Yep.
Okay, so I mean, so basically, this guy is on the hit list just to shut him up.
Well, look at what happened to another Ibn al-Harith, right? He was killed. He was beheaded on Muhammad's order because he had, said, I can produce poetry better than the Quran, and here it is. He was just copying from other people. So.
Okay, I'm going to bring in Marco one last time. Marco, if it doesn't work this time, I'll simply read out what you've written, and then we'll have to move on. This is the last chance. And I still think it's all over.
Look, we've got 600 viewers at the moment, so I think we're being featured by Blog TV.
What?
We're superstars. So, anyway, Marco.
Yeah. No, but can I just say to all the new viewers that this is the Gin and Tonic Show. If you want to call in, just add the Gin and Tonic Show as a Skype contact, and say what we want to talk about. The topic of discussion for this current show is religion, sincerity, and frauds, and in particular, was Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam, a fraud, but not limited to that.
yes, if at any point you wanted to join the show, just send a contact request to the Gin and Tonic Show on Skype. Please don't call in, we'll call you. All guests are advised that we record and broadcast this, but obviously if you're watching this on Blog TV, you at least know that we're recording it. But we also upload it later for YouTube. So we give that disclaimer because somebody disputed it, said that later claimed that they weren't being recorded, even though they know damn well that they were. Anyway, Marco, one last time, see if you can, see if your mic is working, buddy.
Right, so one thing I agree with you guys about is Islam is a load of shit, and yes, that Muhammad's the pedo.
Oh,
so
the accent.
Go ahead.
But I'm just wondering if any of you has thought about maybe looking into Christianity after that fantastic argument that was made on the last Magic Sandwich show of presuppositionalism.
Well, actually, you know, as usual when you troll the show, you bring up serious topics, albeit in your own way. I used to be a Christian, and I heard a bunch of people arguing about it, and I said, well, I'll show those skeptics, and then I read the Bible, and I said, okay, never mind. And then that was it, and I'll cannot conceive of a future in which I ever go back to that religion, and none of the other, I mean, you know, like I was talking about the night journey and the heart-washing things, okay? I mean, I guess in some ways, those stories aren't that much more bizarre than the stories that are commonly told among Christians. But because this is a foreign religion to me, as well as and a religion that's not supported by evidence, it just seems that much sillier. Like if someone came to me from a foreign land and said, "I'm the Son of God," I would just, you know, milk would come out of my nose laughing at this guy. But like I said, there's really no chance, if this is all the different religions of the world have, I don't think that there's much chance of me going to any kind of a theism, any kind of a major world religion, unless there's some unless the world's one true religion is long since buried and nobody practices it, and some archaeologist digs up a scripture that is actually accurate and not filled with absurdities and falsehoods. But yeah, I'd considered Christianity technically when I was part of it. What about everyone else? Frank, have you ever considered becoming a Christian?
No, not at all. No.
Kling?
Yes.
Were you raised religious, or did you once consider?
Somewhat. But the only reasons that I would actually let's throw out rationality. Being religious has nothing to do with being rational. It's the only reasons that I legitimately considered religion were for purely emotional reasons. Like that, for example, Christianity around Christmas time is when I get drawn towards Christianity because of all these nostalgia and lovely memories from my childhood about Jesus and the manger stories and the carols and the Christmas tree and all this kind of stuff. It's for purely emotional reasons and things like identity and sense of community and stuff. It's got nothing to do with the facts. It's got nothing to do with reality or arguments.
Right, but did you hear the presuppositional argument?
No, I'm afraid I didn't have
How do you know that the presuppositional argument exists? We don't even know if the universe exists.
No, because as they said, you're getting the God is endowing his part of his creation with the certainty, and if there is a God, he has the power to do that, and I can testify, and so can those blokes whose names I can't remember. Fuck, what was his name? That fucking Kent Hovind's son, or Eric Hovind, and some other guy.
Yeah, yeah. You know, the thing is, if we work under Psi's hypothesis, or that's really giving it far more dignity than it deserves, but it's out there. If we say, okay, Psi is hearing the voice of God, and the voice of God, not only can it not be wrong, but it carries with it a seal of authenticity that cannot be mistaken. Well, you know, he and Eric were both there, and if I don't mean to rub too much salt in DPR's injury, but the way I would approach it is anytime you have two theists, you're in luck, because you just do what, like, for example, the police do during an investigation when you're interviewing a robber and the getaway driver. You see if you can get them to contradict each other's alibis. So, you know, for example, if someone says, okay, I I hear the voice of God, and this person, you know, to my right also hears the voice of God, and it's the same voice, and it cannot be mistaken, and they say anything different, at least vis-a-vis the things they've consulted this all-knowing voice on, then you've got them. You understand? If Cy says A, B, and C on an issue, and Eric says D, E, and F, the conclusions are, roughly, you know, in short, one or more of them is making it all up, one or more of them is deluded, one or more of them is not hearing the person they think they're hearing, or one or more of them, one or both of them, they're not relating it honestly. Because and that last category, Cy maintains that everyone on the planet is in that category. We all hear the voice of the Christian God, and entire continents of people engage in a lifelong masquerade where they pretend to be Muslim, pretend to be Buddhist, pretend to be Hindu, pretend to be
Well, no, that's the work of devils and demons, right? And also, it's not, you're not automatically going to get this endowment of certainty. You have to do some legwork first. That's why I'm saying this argument should have had you maybe investigating and asking God to show him. Also, you're talking about something which didn't actually happen, and there's nothing to suggest that those blokes are out of sync, right? And right, I heard Stop Spamming in this real, like, arrogant way going, "Ugh, we have many facets of science." Right, well, you're a stuck-up prick, mate, and you haven't learned that all your modes of science are within this reality. We're the ones who are saying there's a God outside this reality, and if you don't know, if you can't get some authenticating authenticity outside of this reality, then it might be you don't know that you're not a brain in a vat. You know what I'm saying? But we've got like the architect outside this reality confirming to us he is real. Well, so you have to do better.
Well, Marco. I don't think that we're all brains in vats, and I base this on the fact that I'm seeing what your brain is capable, and vats are very expensive. So I don't think that someone would. Anyway, thanks for thanks for calling in. As usual, he does very pinpoint trolling, and I think that it actually brings up some very serious subtopics. Okay, see you.
But I suggest you get the facts straight before you attack
2 weeks under a different name, Oliver.
Yeah,
Stop spamming.
For those
consider
viewers,
letting Christ into your life.
I think he should get his facts straight before he attacks people personally.
yeah, for those of the fluctuating 650 viewers who aren't aware, Oliver is a troll who regularly rings in under different pseudonyms and assumed identities to troll us. So, context.
I'm going to go fishing. I think I have a few more callers. Let me fish around in the contact list. If anyone has any comments on to expound on what Oliver was talking about vis-a-vis the merits of Saitan's argument and presuppositional. I can't believe that they actually call it that. Presuppositional apology.
I know. It's like saying wrong argument.
Yeah.
The illogical argument, which I am now currently expounding. But whilst you're doing that here, why don't I give some more materials? Now, this is what I'm going to give you now is from the Hadith literature, which is the stories and sayings of the Prophet Muhammad in Islam. And it is recorded in the Sahih collection of Al-Bukhari. Well, one day Muhammad was, received his revelation from Jibreel, the angel, and he was getting one of his, I believe he was telling one of his scribes about it, and the scribe, there was a man who complained. He said, and this is what happened basically. Initially the verse read, "Not equal are those believers who sit at home and those who strive hard and fight in the cause of Allah with their wealth and lives." But this was appended with, "except for those who are disabled when a crippled follower complained." So basically Muhammad had his revelation and then someone complained, and so Muhammad actually changed the revelation. We also have Umar ibn al-Khattab, which is one of Muhammad's companions, and he suggested 3 things which entered into the Quran. One to do with the station of Ibrahim, one to do with the verse of veiling women, and one to do with Allah will give Muhammad wives that are better than you. And those three were actually suggested by Umar, and then they entered into the Quran, according to hadith from Sahih al-Bukhari. So we have all these, and of course we have the infamous Satanic Verses episode, as recorded by El-Tabari, and so forth. So we have numerous instances of Muhammad very clearly altering the Quran for some political or selfish reason. So I guess you could posit this as evidence that Muhammad was a fraud who was just changing and making stuff up as he went along, to suit some preconceived agenda or bias. So, any thoughts?
So, okay, I actually, in preparation for this, I watched a video by Abdul Rahman Green of the IERA, who was the first person who came up when I searched for the appropriate terms on YouTube, at least. I mean, I did other research, obviously, but he said some things that I could actually agree with in terms of, laying down different categories of, whether he could have been a liar, he could, anyone who professes these things. And I was, when he was talking about this, I was actually, because I was still, fuming about the outcome of the MSS, as he's talking about someone who claims that they have divine revelation could be this or that. And of course, I'm not thinking about Muhammad at that point. I'm thinking of Cy and Eric with their alleged phone to the heavenly Kremlin. And where he lost me was where he said that, well, someone can either be a liar or be deluded, but not both. And I think that is completely wrong, and that lies and delusion go together like chocolate and peanut butter, and have as long as there have been human minds on this planet. And since those things existed, they have gone well together. And I think that the thing is, deluded people, the fact that your mind is not working correctly in some sense, or if you have a neurological condition or psychological condition or what emotional problems, that doesn't speak to the content of your character at all. You could be very delusional, very honest, very delusional, very dishonest. You could be, of course, completely sober, and either or. But I think that it's a little bit like when you have a child who misbehaves. Like if you come into the kitchen and there's the chocolate cake that you had on your table or your kitchen, your counter has all these bites out of it, and you have a kid there who has chocolate all over his face, chocolate all over his hands, and he doesn't realize it because he's a kid. He doesn't know anything about the world. He doesn't understand how empiricism works, like Eric Hovind. He doesn't understand or accept empiricism. He doesn't know that you can just look and see, obviously, and put the pieces together. So you say, well, you're in trouble for eating the cake, and you say, well, I didn't eat the cake. Well, he is both delusional in a sense that his capacities are limited, and he's also lying. The delusion is an assist to the lie because he wouldn't have the courage to tell such a bald-faced lie if he didn't understand that people could see through it. So lies and delusion just go together. They've been very happily married for a long, long time. But stop. You avoided a very important question that our previous caller asked. Will you accept Jesus Christ as your personal Lord and Savior?
Sure.
Okay.
Of course, as soon as he shows up here, and immediately.
There you go. Okay. Let's see. Any other comments before we go? Frank, you haven't talked in a while?
Yeah, I mean, have you guys touched upon whether the companions of Muhammad, like the powerful among them, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, Ali, whether they actually also believed them sincerely? If we look at the at the history and the seerah, as recorded, I mean, by the historians.
Klingschor, any comment?
Not really. Although I would say that I mean, we haven't really narrowed in on it per se in this show.
Yeah.
I would actually argue that Muhammad was sincere. And that regarding to your thing with delusion, I think that he was lying, but he deluded himself into thinking that what he was saying was okay, that it was true, that God was okay with it all.
Well, but Frank was asking about his first generation of followers.
So I actually missed that question.
Right. I mean, okay, there's some people who, like first the Umayyads, not the dynasty, but the actual aristocrats, are often portrayed as cynics who, changed their alignment based on how the winds were blowing. So if any of them are among the number of his followers, it seems like they didn't really believe, but they just were trying to preserve their position and possessions. Now, I think that the person who really made Islam a world power, and that was Ibn al-Walid, a man who was so victorious that he was actually recalled by Umar because Umar wrote that he would get, if this continued, if this winning streak continued, people would say that Islam was succeeding not because of Allah but because of Ibn al-Walid. That's what a force to be reckoned with this guy really was. But the circumstances of his conversion and his change of alignment are very suspicious, because he fought against the Muslims at the Battle of Uhud, nearly dealt them a finishing blow. Led a battle in which Muhammad himself was injured and could have been killed. Even slight injuries could get infected back in the day. Do you remember how bad was Muhammad's wound after the Battle of Uhud? Do you remember, Kling? Does there anything specific?
He was bleeding. I think he had like a broken tooth or something.
Oh, that's not so bad.
Wasn't he from the shoulder as well, a cut?
What?
Wasn't there a cut on his shoulder?
I don't recall. Well, anyway, he must have walked it off. But anyway, you have Ibn al-Walid fighting against them, deals them this humiliating defeat, and very nearly ending the life of the guy leading the religion himself. And then later on, he gets a letter from some of his relatives, I believe his cousins, who had already joined up with Muhammad, and under their urging, he changes his alignment. And at first is given a very low post in leadership, but rises up the ranks very quickly, especially as his superiors end up getting killed on the battlefield because they didn't know what they were doing. But that there were probably a lot of people who had varying degrees. Maybe some of them came around eventually. Maybe some people said, well, I'll go along with this at first. Some people, as he became more powerful, I'm sure it became much more difficult to discern, if you're looking at an earnest and sincere believer's perspective, who was joining because they wanted to be on the winning side and who was joining out of sincere belief.
Yeah, but they all have this. Look at Saul and Paul, same story.
What do you mean?
Well, that you first have the opponent who then later converts because it's so much better and so much nicer and makes so much more sense.
Well, but that's not the story of. I mean, Saul got spirit raped on the road to Damascus. You understand? I mean,
yeah, I'm talking about the principle.
Yeah, but it's funny because we were talking about Sai's assertion that everybody hears the voice of God, and then how does he gel that with the road to Damascus story? You know what I mean? I mean, if everybody heard a voice as clear as the Road to Damascus version of the Road to Damascus story that Saul underwent, at long last I got it out. If everybody had that happen to them, then there really would be no one who denied it, just because they would say, yeah, I too got blinded and had a voice from the sky shout at me and then stumbled around until scales fell from my eyes and so forth. But, contrary to any assertions that there's free will or you get to choose, Saul, against his will, is shown firsthand, and through firsthand interaction with the God of the Christian Bible, commanded to change his ways. Why do you persecute me? I mean, if everybody heard, if we all heard a voice booming from the heavens, but then also rattling inside our heads, why do you persecute me? Things would be very different, but apparently.
But I see it. Yeah, but I see it as a concept. You see, because he was the doubter. He was the one who was persecuting the Christians, and he was actually working against the powers to be. And then something happened, bonk, and suddenly he changes his mind, and then he turns from skeptic to somebody who thinks about it, who then becomes a follower. Now, the
That's
same thing
similar
happened
to
here in Islam, where he was
Umar.
first a doubter, then exactly, where then he heard something, and then from a doubter he started thinking about this, and then became a follower. So I think every religion needs these people.
Yeah, and Umar during his reign used to invent many, he wouldn't necessarily follow what Muhammad's Sharia would do. For example, he stopped the use of the had on thieves, cutting off the hands of thieves because there was famine or so on. The one of Muhammad's companions who I really suspect his sincerity is Uthman. He was obsessed with power and wealth incredibly. He ruled for 12 years, most historians, 12 years or so. And other than him appointing his Abdullah ibn Abu Sarh, his cousin, who he said was excluded from amnesty during the conquest of Mecca. Uthman, when there was a revolution against him, and there was the Muslims from Egypt and some from Iraq were surrounding his palace, demanding that he should step out and give the Khilafah to Ali or to other one of the Muslims. And he wouldn't. He refused repeatedly. And he would say, I shall not take off a gown with which God has bestowed upon, something like that. Although he was promised, guaranteed to have heaven if he in the hereafter, promised by Muhammad. They're called the 10 among Sunni Muslims. Now it's not. I mean, we're talking, supposing that the sources, the Islamic sources, are correct in describing what happened. But if we were to take it to be true, then their sincerity is for sure at stake.
Well, I don't know. I mean, he could be a true believer and still be really, really greedy?
Well, yeah, but I mean, if you're 80 and you're promised heaven and you have ruled for 12 years and people are demanding that you will step out, or you should at least hand over your cousin, Marwan ibn al-Hakam, the father of Abdul Malik. Otherwise, we shall kill you, and I mean, it was I don't know. I mean, he could have. Well, it's not necessary, but I mean, it raises doubt. In any case, at least his appointment of Abdullah ibn Abi Surah.
I'm sorry. What exactly was suspicious of the appointment?
Oh, because it's the very same man who was among the writers for Muhammad. Muhammad used to dictate the Quran to them, and then he made up stuff and found out that Muhammad was a fraud.
Oh, okay.
He became an apostate, and he was excluded from amnesty.
Okay, so yeah, sorry, this is the guy we're talking about earlier. So this was the guy who was made governor of Egypt by Uthman.
Yes, by Uthman.
Okay.
Yes.
We have a caller, Polly Chaser, who's been waiting a long time. I forgot what it was they wanted to talk about, but it's too late because they're on the show now. Hello, welcome, thank you for calling in.
Good evening, or good afternoon.
What do you have for us?
To you. I actually wanted to make more a general observation I made over the years in watching a lot of debates, which is about the leveling of the playing field, sort of, this is how it's called, isn't it? And it actually really annoys me. It seems that in a lot of religious debate, all that religious people do is, instead of actually bringing evidence up for their points of, coming up with proper arguments why they believe whatever they believe, is that basically trying to discredit evolution or science in general, whereas they basically saying, well, science doesn't have any definite answer, therefore science is open for everything, which makes my hypothesis, because I really don't want to name it a theory to begin with, my hypothesis is equal to your theory, and therefore my theory is equally valid as your theory. And I actually just wanted to know what you guys think about this. Why is this not getting addressed more? Because I find this to be honest, I find this intellectually dishonest. and I never hear this being brought up in conversations.
Anyone?
Well, yeah, I mean, I find it quite annoying when people do that and try and it's sort of like it reminds me of also when people try and say that atheism is a religion. And so we both have faith-based belief. No. So I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, you just point out that it's wrong and debunk it. I guess
Yeah, but that's the point, isn't it? It never gets debunked. I mean, it's one thing to say that science can't give definite answers. I think we all can agree on that, although there is a high degree of probability we can achieve through science. But to say, therefore, my hypothesis, because as soon as you start calling something a theory, you have to give it some credibility, which I'm just not willing to do. So as soon as you start saying, therefore, my hypothesis on equal grounds with your theory, you basically give them some sort of ground to say what they say, and I think they should be stopped right there at their tracks, and we should step in and say, oh, wait a minute,
Alright.
this is not, get what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, the rationalizer gave me a very because we talked about a lot of stuff, and we discussed this issue once, and let's see what am I doing?
It's basically, the same with the whole debating about God. The whole premise, we as atheists have to take on so much assumptions just to do them a favor. We never ask him, well, what is God? What does it mean? What is it? What is a soul? What is a spirit? What does it mean when you say supernatural? We never stop them in their tracks. We always just, for the sake of the arguments, we give them that. We say, all right,
I no
we'll
longer
get
do
you,
that.
And I don't
made a video
understand why we
about
keep
this.
doing that.
This is yeah, I agree with at least with that. But you're talking about two different things here. One of them is presuppositions. The other one is the religion science false dichotomy, or false analogy. With the presuppositions, I agree. I do not accept presuppositions. It's just I just reject them because you can wrangle and you can wrangle and say anything. You can argue anything for anything with presuppositions. So it's kind of meaningless.
Get away with it.
Well, I don't. A lot of people do. A lot of people feel comfortable in going into all these big, convoluted, nonsense discussions about, sin and why is God merciful and loving and God, blah blah, and they get into these big stuff. And I'm not interested. I just don't allow it. I just don't go there at all. I just destroy it, where it stands.
Stop. Sorry.
But, well, hold on, just with this thing, the reason why I mentioned the rationalizing before is because with this science, religion, false comparison, basically science is getting more and more accurate. It isn't like science started off saying it was square, and then it said it was a circle, and then it said it was a triangle. No. Science began saying that it was, a rectangle, like a squared circle, and then it was a circle, and then it was, spheroid. Like it actually gets more and more accurate. And it's sort of like, and the thing the rationalizer pointed out was, it's sort of like, science is like this. Pick a number between, I've got a number between 1 and 100. What science can do is say, it's not above 70. So you get rid of everything above 70. And then it's not below 30, so you get everything below 30. It's not above, it's in between 45 and 55. And so science, even though it may not have the exact truth, science is able to get more and more towards what is true, and what is correct.
So we can agree on that. So if one side of the argument is dealing with absolutes, and the other side of the argument is dealing with probability, falsifiability, observation, and evidence, how can you ever have an honest debate about anything?
Well, I know that they could easily render Klingschor's argument invalid because he doesn't even know if numbers really exist. I'm going to let you go, Paulie. Thank you for the comment.
All right, thanks for taking me.
Take care. Come
Good
back
show, guys.
anytime. Whoop, what? It gave me that little... How was the call quality when I let him go, so I thought that the call dropped, but it didn't. Okay, so, last caller. I hope you're ready. Aziz. Okay, if I ambushed him a little bit. He messaged me earlier. I don't know if he's ready to come on. Anyway, while he's getting established, any other comments on what Polychaser and Klingschor were talking about? Frank or Stop?
No, I just want to say, why do people in the chat write these things down where people cannot really address the problems or questions, assertions, or whatever? Why don't people call in here? It's much easier to have a discussion, a conversation about things, than writing it down. Why don't you just go and call us? We will relate to it. We don't bite. We don't do anything. We can have a rational conversation about these things. Stop spewing nonsense in the chat.
Aziz, are you in the chat right now, or were you a viewer that called in? Because I don't know if he's having some kind of problem with his connection, or he got impatient and left, even though I was only there for a minute. Yeah, I've kept an eye on the chat. I think a lot of these guys are just taking the piss, and that's why they don't call in.
Yeah, but this is the whole point. I mean, we've lost I don't know how many hundreds because they're probably Christians or whatever, so they realize they're not going to get far. But there are some who stayed behind. So the whole point is it's a call-in show. It is not a forum. It is not a comment section on YouTube. It is a call-in show.
Yeah.
This is what we're here for. Call us.
Yeah, I incorporate some comments and questions from the chat on an arbitrary basis, and also, of course, like, if you have technical difficulties and can't call in, then I guess it's reasonable. And of course, we usually allow people who have a counterpoint to cut in line. Yeah, but call in. We're not going to necessarily team up on you and beat you up. We welcome the counterpoint, and you don't have to.
Thank you for the disclaimer.
Sorry, go ahead.
Thank you for the disclaimer. Not necessarily.
Yeah, Stop and I were talking about different approaches to guests after the Nadir Ahmed show. And he was saying, you know, we shouldn't be so nice, we shouldn't accommodate, we should just let him have it, and so forth. And I said, well, so you're suggesting a program where we just call in, you know, we get a Muslim or some other opposing point of view in, and we just yell at him and call him stupid. And I thought, I can imagine the Stop Spamming show in my mind, in my mind's eye, and you know, you're just yelling at him and calling him an idiot, and I'd watch that show, but I don't think you'd get many callers.
I don't call anybody an idiot. I don't call anybody stupid.
I think you did to Nadir. I had to really stop you. He said something, admittedly, in your defense, quite idiotic, and you're like, you idiot! And I just, whoa, stop. No, you can check the footage. I'm pretty sure you did. It's a fair, yeah. I was sympathetic to you, even though we tried to discourage that here. Okay.
So nobody's taking the bait?
Nobody. Okay, well, no. There's one person who's no, I'm not even gonna do. I mean, if they can't get their stuff straight. They just everyone has been urging some people to call in, but they won't. So, anyway, it's been 2 hours. I think we're gonna call it a day. If anyone wants to call into the future, we're gonna have another show same time in 2 weeks. And like I said, we welcome counterpoint, and you can also just call in and ask a question, and then get out of the call if you don't want to be there for the aftermath, and if you think you're going to get beaten up. You know, you don't need to feel like we're going to ambush you and win by strength in numbers or by not giving you your turn to speak. But yeah, I'm not going to just sit here and read crap off the chat all day. You know, if you can't summon the courage to call in, I don't feel obligated to address it, and that's all that there is to it. So thank you everyone for coming. Thank you to everyone in advance who watches it on YouTube. Salam alaikum. We'll see you in 2 weeks. Bye-bye.